Hello, my name is Brandon Sykes, and today we are going to talk about the book of Ruth in the Bible. So in the book of Ruth, we're going to summarize the story. We're going to talk about some of the themes and theological issues going on, as well as what it means to the Israelite religion and what some of the Near East context is, the area around where this takes place, and how that weaves this story together. So let's dive right in. The book of Ruth opens with a note about the time period that is at hand. It happens during the time of the Judges. And this book, Judges, happens right before Ruth in the Christian Bible. And in Judges, we learn that the time is a bad time in Israel. God is on the back burner. He is behind everybody's thinking. And these judges are these morally righteous characters who have come to remind people of who God is and what God does in a way that ends up being pretty violent and almost like a warlord type position. So it's the whole point with Ruth coming right before Judges and noting this time of the Judges is simply saying this is not a great time to be an Israelite. God is not on many people's lips, and it's just not a good time. So what does that mean going forward? Well, what it means is that the story is going to reflect how God is present with the characters that take up the book of Ruth. So Ruth is a surprisingly linear story, which is not something that typically happens in the Bible. There's typically spans of time that occur and flash over, but Ruth's pretty linear. We see that the story is about Naomi, who is Ruth's mother-in-law. And Naomi has moved to this city, to this place called Moab, because there's a famine in Bethlehem where Naomi and Elimelech, her husband, are from. And they move there with their two sons. And when they get there, the two sons marry two women named Orpah and Ruth. And then the men start dropping. So Elimelech dies, and then both sons die. And now Naomi is left alone with her two daughters-in-law. So Naomi hears that the food shortage that drove them to Moab is over in Bethlehem. The famine has ceased. And she tells Orpah and Ruth, go home. Go to your family homes. Don't stay with me. You're good. I'm going to go home. Y'all go home. We'll be done. Orpah says okay and goes. Ruth, however, says absolutely not. Ruth refuses and claims to Naomi that she'll go wherever Naomi goes and even worship the God of Naomi. Now, this is a pretty big ordeal that we'll get to in a little while. So Naomi and Ruth, they go to Bethlehem, and they go during the barley harvest. So again, this famine is over, this harvest has come, and it is plentiful. And Naomi knows the Levitical law, so she sends Ruth to go glean, to go take harvest from someone else's field, which is perfectly fine in the law. So Ruth goes and she gets to work. Now, the field that she's in, it belongs to a man named Boaz. And Boaz is known throughout his community as a man of standing. He is righteous and compassionate. He comes out to the field in the morning and he greets his servants first thing in the name of the Lord, and they respond in kind. He asks, who is this stranger? Okay, because clearly Ruth is out of place. She is a Moabite in Israel, in Bethlehem, so she's clearly out of place. And he asks his servants, who is she? They tell him what he wants to know, and he says, okay, well, that's fine. Treat her well. Treat her as if she was one of you. So then Boaz speaks to Ruth directly, and he says, don't leave. Do not leave my field. Stay with my female servants, and you will be looked after. He then blesses Ruth for her loyalty that she shows to Naomi by leaving her ancestral home and clinging to Naomi. Ruth then returns in kind and blesses Boaz for allowing him to glean in his field and for treating her like a servant even though she isn't one. She works until the evening and takes all of her food and goes back to Naomi and lets Naomi and she eat dinner. She tells the story of what has occurred on this day to Naomi, and Naomi is just ecstatic. And she tells Ruth, like, Boaz is actually a kinsman of ours, and he can redeem our family. So the harvest ends. The same thing happens day after day with Ruth going to Boaz's field and gleaning. The harvest is over, and Naomi and Ruth, they hatch this plan to get Boaz to agree to marry Ruth and to provide that redemption for the family. In Levitical law, if the husband dies, it's up to the brother or the father to take care of the widow, if they could still have children. So that excludes Naomi, but it still includes Ruth. So Naomi's plan here is to have Ruth marry Boaz so that at least Ruth will be restored to wholeness, where she'll be able to continue the family name and receive the family inheritance. So Ruth says, okay, we're going to do this. So Ruth goes to the threshing floor, which is where Boaz is, and she waits. They're eating, Boaz and his servants, they're eating, they're drinking, they're celebrating the end of the harvest, and finally they all go to sleep, and Ruth sneaks in, and she uncovers Boaz's feet, and she startles him. She tells him this plan. She says, we think you're this, or we know that you're this kinsman, redeemer, and we're asking you to redeem us, to marry me, Ruth, and redeem us. Boaz says, I'll do it. And he calls her this woman of noble character because he knows her loyalty and her faith has never wavered, both to Naomi and to this God that she didn't know a season beforehand. However, Ruth says, we want to bring Naomi in on this too. We're going to make her a part of this too. And Boaz says, of course we are. So then Boaz tells Ruth, lay here, go to sleep, catch some Z's, and we're going to get up early in the morning, and you're going to go before anybody else sees you so they don't think we did something bad, and then I'm going to handle it from here. So in the morning, Boaz does get up after Ruth has left, and he goes to the city gate. And what he does at the city gate is he waits. There is a kinsman that is closer that presented the problem previously with him marrying her. And this kinsman has to give up the right to marry Ruth because he's a closer kinsman. See, he has right to inherit the land via purchase, and we're going to see why he might not like that idea. So Boaz goes and gets him, and then Boaz also assembles 10 elders of the city, 10 people that know the Levitical law, that can bear witness and can sort of kind of in a courtroom type setting say, we agree that this is right. So Boaz gets the closest kinsman and these 10 guys, and they all sit down and hash this out. And Boaz says, I've discovered that Naomi is getting ready to sell her inherited land because she has no one to continue the family. You're the closer kinsman. Would you like to purchase it? And the closer kinsman immediately says, yes, I'll take it. Then Boaz points out, well, Ruth comes as a part of that package. Now, Boaz knows the character of Ruth, so he has no problem marrying Ruth. But this closer kinsman has never met Ruth, knows that she is a Moabite, he knows of her, but he's never met her, he's never experienced her kindness and her loyalty, and he immediately is like, nope, I'm good, you can have it. So Boaz says, great, then I will accept that, I will take Ruth in the inheritance, so let it be so. So they then do a sandal passing where the closer kinsman takes his sandal off and hands it to Boaz. And the elders assembled say, "We see this, we accept this as correct. You are now in the right to marry Ruth and inherit Naomi's land." The book almost ends right here. It has a couple of blessings that the people give to Boaz, and then Boaz and Ruth have a son. The community names him Obed, and they deliver him to Naomi, and Naomi is restored in this moment because Naomi accepted the fact that she was never going to have her own child, she was never going to marry, she was just going to die alone. But Ruth and Boaz wouldn't let her do that, and they bring her into the family, and they have this son, Obed, that Naomi now gets to be a grandmother to and dote and love on. So the final thing is this blessing of Naomi being restored via her grandson, Obed. And then at the very, very end, we see this genealogy that's tacked on. It's completely random other than a couple of names on it. And it's a genealogy of Perez, and it has Obed and Boaz on it. Boaz is number 6, and Obed is number 7. And what it reveals is that Obed is the grandfather of David, the future king of Israel that the people have been begging for. And if you know anything about David, you know that David is not only the king that Israel's been asking for, David is in the line of Jesus. So Jesus is a Davidic line. David is one of Jesus' ancestors, which means Obed is one of Jesus' ancestors, which means Boaz and Ruth are some of Jesus' ancestors. And that's the end of the book. So it's not long at all. There's only 4 chapters. I highly recommend that you read it for yourself. So now we're going to talk about some of the themes and theological issues that happen. Biblical narrative, it's a wide-ranging thing. Okay? There's tons of themes and issues and theological considerations and mights and maybes that exist in the Bible. And we're going to point out 2 in the book of Ruth. We're going to talk about redemption and loyalty. God creates these covenants, these agreements with Abraham and with Moses for the family of Israel to be born, right? So God accepts the Israelites as God's own family via these covenants. The covenants are also meant to redeem these people, because these people have existed before God. The name hasn't, but the people have. And the whole point of the covenant is to redeem these set-aside people to be part of God, so that they can have a right relationship. And then the covenant also demonstrates a loyalty. So to accept the covenant is to demonstrate a loyalty to God. So redemption and loyalty are the key factors in the covenant. The time of Judges being a low point in Israel is when Ruth happens, and that's why redemption and loyalty are so key to this book. God isn't on anyone's mind. Naomi needs this redemption because of the loss of her husband and her sons. Now, she's never lost faith in God, but she's in lament of God. Because in theory, God has killed her sons because they went to Moab in Israelite thinking. Ruth has offered to come back home. And that's an important thing because that makes Ruth a proselyte, which means someone who gave up their own gods to go worship another god. That's not a thing that was pretty common in this time period. That wasn't a forced slave type thing. So Ruth agrees to this as well. So Naomi loses her children because they went to Moab. Her husband dies for mysterious circumstances. And then Ruth is the exact opposite of what is going on. Ruth agrees, even though all this happened, she agrees to go with Naomi and to worship Naomi's God. So it's the exact opposite. So they come to Bethlehem, and everybody knows about Naomi and Ruth immediately, right? Ruth is this foreigner, and she sticks out like a sore thumb, okay? Moab is an immoral place to the Israelites. It is forbidden. This makes Ruth an immediate outcast. She has no right, she has no protection in Bethlehem, in the land of Israel, but she still takes this risk going with Naomi. And Naomi knows about this risk, and that's why she encouraged Orpah and Ruth to leave, to go back to their Moabite families. So Ruth again shows this loyalty to Naomi by taking this risk. Now Boaz is introduced and he has this blessing on his lips. The Lord be with you, he says to his servants, and the servants respond in kind, the Lord bless you. And this is our example of Boaz's loyalty to God. Boaz is showing this demonstration of faith, that he has not fallen to the wayside in the time of the judges, and instead he is just as steadfast and faithful as ever. He asks about Ruth, and when he first speaks to her, he lets on that he's already heard talk of her, but he doesn't make an assumption on who she is. Based on that talk, he simply wants to get to know her, and then he praises her and blesses her for this loyalty to Naomi and giving up everything to stay with her. He offers her this blessing of protection, and it's one that she actually repeats back to him in the very next chapter, in chapter 3. So Ruth continues to display this loyalty to Naomi by bringing this food for them to eat and then repeating this process day after day, every day of the harvest. Naomi and Ruth then plot to convince Boaz to marry them in chapter 3. It's not an overly ambitious thing because they know Boaz's character. They know that Boaz is a man of righteousness and compassion. He's going to do the thing that the law says to do. So they already have an expectation of what he is going to do. And then Ruth here secretly intends to bring Naomi in on this because of her loyalty to Naomi. She's not going to leave her out to dry. So Ruth goes to Boaz. The Bible alludes to this sexual act that takes place. I think it's totally wrong because the act of redemption and loyalty would be completely broken if there was a way that this happened. So what I think happened is Ruth goes to Boaz and she bares herself, removes her clothing and bares herself, and she offers herself to him in a show of, this was my loyalty to Naomi. I'm offering this loyalty to you because I trust that you are a loyal person and will treat me right. And he does that. He agrees to marry her. He treats her kindly. He says to her, put your clothes on. We don't want anybody to think anything bad is going on because we have to do this right. And leave in the morning just so that people don't get a misunderstanding. Having sex here would be the same as become married. And because of that other relative, that's just completely counterintuitive. So when you break it down to bare minimums, Boaz knows there's someone else who has a better chance marrying Ruth than he does. There's no reason to skip over that guy because that just completely breaks God's law, and Boaz isn't about that. So finally, Boaz goes to the gate. He meets this relative and lays everything before him, sorta, and the whole process moves through, with Boaz eventually getting permission to marry Ruth and inherit the family land. The important thing here is the blessings. So the community blesses Boaz, and that blessing is also going to be a blessing from God. And the blessing from God is that this child that is born, Obed, is now a continuation to the line of David, which is then a continuation all the way to the line of Jesus. So this blessing the community provides is a blessing from God as well that points to the future saving of the world, right? So through Ruth's redemption and loyalty, and through Boaz's loyalty and righteousness, we get to the point to where Jesus comes. And Jesus is able to offer the redemption and loyalty that only Jesus gets to offer via the cross and the way that Jesus teaches us to live. One of the things to note here is Ruth's foreignness. Okay, this is one of those theological issues. Ruth's foreignness is not a thing that is accepted. Okay, the people do not like foreigners. They especially don't like Moabites currently. And here's Ruth, a Moabite, in their land, being treated very well by this respected man. So I can imagine some of the negative things people were saying about Ruth and about Boaz. But Boaz, he demonstrates this protection and commitment, right, to the Lord by protecting those in need, but also to Ruth by saying, I will marry you, and we have to do everything right, but I am totally committed to you. And her faithfulness throughout this whole process, because she could have cut and run at any point and no one would have blamed her, her faithfulness in God is paramount here because it shows that no matter where you're born or where you're from, that you can believe and worship the God of Israel. And this is something that the Israelites have struggled with accepting for a very long time at this point. Being a foreigner is also pointing towards Christ's mission of being a worldwide redeemer. Ruth is one of the mothers of the Messiah, and that list of women who takes you to Jesus Christ, and she's certainly not the only foreign woman on this list. These foreigners account directly for Jesus' birth, and they bring Jesus into the redemption of not only Israel, but also the entire world. Her acceptance by an Israelite man who had no need to accept a foreigner, except for faith and compassion, is used as an example to accept all of those that are different than us and to believe they are children of God. Ruth has a particular importance for the Israelite religion as it exists in the post-exilic times and to today. The book of Ruth is one of the megalot, which is the 5 scrolls that are read during the high holy feast days of Judaism. So Ruth is read during Passover, which is the feast celebrating the exodus out of Egypt, right? It's where they put the lamb's blood over the doorpost so the angel of death would pass over their house. So this reading is particularly important, and it's why it's here, is the connection of the giving of the law and then following of the law. So Naomi's sons die because they marry Moabite women. And that's against the law. Going to Moab, marrying women, bad. Ruth, however, is blessed, and she benefits because she is that proselyte. She renounces her gods and agrees to worship the one true God of Israel. Boaz is seen as a judge by the Jewish people, working out of Bethlehem, and he's not like the judges in the book of Judges, where he typically does some kind of fighting and warriorness. He simply is righteous, he's respected, he's respectful of others, and he keeps God first. And this, by keeping God first, that allows him to be seen as one of these judge characters who knows what is right and wrong. The Hebrew Bible also puts this particular text right after Proverbs. The Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible don't line up all the time on where things go. So the reason that it follows Proverbs is because in Proverbs 12 and 31, there's a term woman of noble character used. And then in Ruth 2, Boaz says the same thing, in Ruth chapter 3, Boaz calls Ruth this woman of noble character. Back in Ruth 2, a male phrase is used for Boaz of a man of standing. And this is to put the two on the same level, to show that these two might go together well because of her noble character and his standing. Richard Hess points out that this could easily connect the two with Proverbs for that woman of noble character note in Proverbs and point towards Ruth being that woman of noble character. And this is particularly important because of the fact that Ruth gives birth to Obed, who eventually, through his family line, gives birth to David and then Jesus. Christians care about Jesus. Judaism doesn't. So that's what is important with that. We have this pre-note of noble character, and then Ruth defines the noble character as Ruth, and then the genealogy at the end puts the two together with Obed leading to David. When we look at ancient Near Eastern context, we also see how this book is shaped by the surrounding neighbors of Bethlehem, right? So the genealogy provided at the end of the book, it is more than likely an attachment, right? It is not an original text. It's probably done by an editor or some other person at another time. And why is it there? It's reflective of other texts written at this time in surrounding places. The Ugaritic texts from the 13th century BC and the king's lists that have been seen from Babylon and Assyria and other sources, these tell us that these lists are two-sided lists, right? They're tablets. On one side of the tablet is a genealogy of kings for that area, and then on the other side is this piece of art that is typically poetry or something of the like. Ruth fits perfectly in these kings lists, providing a genealogy of kings because David is the first primary king of Israel and Judah, and then Ruth is a very nice, lovely piece of poetry that describes how we get to David. So this can describe why the original biblical authors included genealogies where they do, because Ruth isn't the only place that occurs, but Ruth in the Christian Bible takes place right before or immediately before 1 Samuel, which is where we're introduced to David. So that is why the genealogy is there, and that is what connects us to these kings lists, where on the other side is a poetic story that relates to these kings lists. The marriage ceremony is the other piece of this pie. As what Boaz does for Ruth and Naomi in redeeming their land, it's not normal because it goes beyond the law. Levitical law was only direct male descendants. Boaz is not a direct male descendant. He's not a brother or a father of Naomi's husband. And so that puts him not at odds, but extra the Levitical law. So this is outside of normal, but it's not necessarily outside of normal for the time and the community where they lived. In the area, say Moab or other places that surround Bethlehem, this could be the common way. And that is why this is perfectly fine and acceptable to the people of Bethlehem. The same thing with the sandal. This could be an identifier to others that this has happened and this is okay. To me, it's almost as important as anything that's said because I see it as this giving over of a key whenever you purchase a home, right? It's this physical symbol of you passing on ownership of something. In this case, it's a physical representation of the elders that both agree to the term, and so there can't be any misunderstanding if someone didn't hear or is hard of hearing or anything like that. So I hope that has shed some light on the book of Ruth. As I said earlier, it's only 4 chapters. You should really go read it for yourself. It took me about 15 minutes to read it when I was preparing for this. And when you're thinking critically about the Bible, it's important to consider these major themes, to look at the book you're reading, pick out the themes, pick out the theological issues, and then consider them, because you might have to dig a little to get at them. For example, Ruth's foreignness and how that plays out. It's equally as important that you consider the time frame of when this book was written and who it might have been written for via the context of where it happens. And remember that the Old Testament stuff was written for the Hebrew people, for the people of Israel, and how it specifically connects to them, and then how we as Christians see it in our lens. So my name is Ben Brandon Sykes, and I hope that this was enlightening, and I look forward to talking to you soon.